Hello humans, it's just Martine, and this week I'm going to give myself the hardest reading challenge I've ever done. If you know anything about what I'm like as a reader, then you know that I read a book at the same time. I'm usually reading like 7, 8 books all at once. I'm flipping between books constantly. So this week I'm going to challenge myself to read one book at a time. This could do one of two things for my reading. Either this could make me read significantly less than usual because I dread the idea of only having one book to pick up, or I read even more than usual because I just want to get to the next book so I can readjust my vibe once more and pick a book that I am feeling. My guess, if I had to guess, is that it will lead to less reading, but we'll only have to see. And so far, my hypothesis is correct. But this is why we can't establish causation in most cases. I have read less today than I would read on a normal Monday morning, but the reason is probably not because I'm doing this challenge. The reason is probably that I read for well over 5 hours yesterday. Correlation, not causation. I'm going to be starting with I See Reality, which is a short story collection by a bunch of different authors. I figured this was a safe start because if I'm not enjoying the vibe will change quickly, so this is like my warm-up. We'll have to see how this goes. Happy Tuesday. I actually read this whole book yesterday, and I don't know why I'm surprised about that because it's a pretty short book, like it's less than 300 pages. It's a YA, so like there aren't that many words per page, and I've averaged more than a book a day so far this year. So I don't know why I didn't think I would read a whole book in a day during this challenge, but there's that. I finished I See Reality and I'm giving it 4 stars. Again, this is a short story collection by a bunch of YA authors about totally different things. Like, I can't give you a theme around this except that like it's real life. Like there are things that real people are dealing with. We had something about immigration, we had something about teen pregnancy, we had something about like drug use, we had something about coming out, like it just had everything. And there were some stories in this that were definite 5 stars. It was like, if this story or these stories together were the collection, it would have been a 5 stars. And then there were others that were more like 3-star vibes or 4-star vibes. It kind of dragged it down. The story by Heather Demetrios, 3 Imaginary Conversations with You, was incredible. I loved it. The Downside of Fabulous by Kristen Elizabeth Clark, also fabulous, also loved that. Hush by Marcella Pixley, deeply unsettling, loved that. This book made me feel so many things. It made me happy, it made me sad, concerned, it made me laugh, all the things, which I think was definitely the intent of this collection because there's this quote in the front of the book. You can tell a book is real when your heart beats faster. Real books make you sweat, cry if no one is looking. Real books help you make sense of your crazy life. Real books tell it true, don't hold back and make you stronger. But most of all, real books give you hope because it's not always going to be like this. And the books, the good ones, the real ones, show you how to make it better now. And so I think that was like the overarching thing is like you're going to feel things and not all of them are going to be good, but like real stories and books help you get through that. I really liked this collection. Glad I picked it up, and I do think it was the right move to start with a short story collection because like dipping in and out of different voices and worlds I think definitely helped drive me forward in this. Read that, and then I picked up Tell Me No Lies, which was originally a Wattpad book, and technically it's the second in a duology. And so I started reading it and I started a bit lost. The author tries to help us situate ourselves a bit, but I did do some Googling to be like, what happened in the first one? After reading those descriptions, I'm glad I didn't read the first one because it seemed a lot more romance heavy, and this one, I don't know, seems a lot more mystery, thriller heavy. Maybe I'm wrong. So far it's just okay, but I'm plugging on through. I just wanted you to know, like, I finished this book. I started this book. Yay!
Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I did end up finishing my book last night, but I don't have it with me, so I'll talk to you about it later. And then I started another book, and that is New Pompeii by Daniel Godfrey, which is a sci-fi book. So we're changing up the vibes as much as we can over here with my limited selection of Dollar Tree books that I have in my room currently. So far, I think the experiment is going well. In fact, it's going better than I thought it would because I've already finished 2 books. Granted, they were short and very quick books, but still, reading is reading. And I thought this challenge would just make me not want to read at all. I think when this experiment is really going to be interesting is when this weekend arrives. That's the time that I rely on flipping between books the most. Weekends, I often just read all day, but I don't think that's likely to happen if I just have one book that I can be working on. You know what I mean? So I think that's really when this challenge is going to heat up and get more difficult for me, but I guess we'll see.
If I just straight up told you the synopsis of this book, I would be giving away the entire first book, and it's not like I'm out here recommending the first book. I've never read it, and I didn't love this book, but I still feel like that might be unfair, so I'm not going to. I'm going to say that the first book technically follows this girl. She has agoraphobia and she spends most of her life online on Twitter. She's obsessed with this one like pop star. His name's Eric Thorne. One day she starts up a conversation on Twitter with this Eric Thorne hate account that is actually Eric Thorne in disguise, and things go from there. And this is the second book following what everybody in the comments on Goodreads said was the craziest plot twist at the end of book one. And so I feel like the tone in this book is substantially different from the first book. Again, I haven't read the first book, but that's my guess based on what people said in their reviews of the first book. So in this one, we're following those same characters, but crazy stuff is happening. And I ended up giving this 2.5 stars. Does it make me a little prejudiced that I already went in knowing it was by a Wattpad author? Yeah. Sure. Did it still read like a Wattpad book? Yeah. Is there anything wrong with Wattpad books? Not necessarily. I loved Wattpad growing up. Like, this was before I had Libby, so if I wanted to read a book online, Wattpad was like the best way to do that. But there is something. You can just, you know what I'm talking about when I say it's like Wattpad writing. It wasn't as bad as some other Wattpad writing I've read, but like it still was Wattpad writing, you know? I did like the like multimedia elements of this, but overall it was just like a fast, fun read. Like, I wasn't here for substance and I didn't really get substance. It was interesting because the main character's agoraphobia was still like discussed a lot in this book, in spite of what happened at the end of the first book. And like particularly we get this look at specific anxiety disorders, and I do have to say the author didn't do the worst job with that, so I can appreciate that. And I will say the plot twist I did not see coming, so she had me there. This is just the kind of book you pick up if you want a quick fun read and then want to forget about it forever. We're moving on from it now. Happy Saturday. I have 2 books to tell you about, not because I read them at the same time. I read them separately. It took me 3 days to read New Pompeii, and then I read Love and Other Carnivorous Plants in 1 day, and I was not anticipating that. We'll start with New Pompeii, which I gave 3.5 stars. I really waffled here for a bit. Should I give it 4? Should I give it 3.5? Blah, blah, blah. Because the vibes were so good in this. But then I read some other people's reviews and I was like, yeah, thanks for putting into words what I can't about what's bothering me about this. So 3.5 it is. But I am intrigued about the sequel, which I also have on my shelf right now, also from Dollar Tree. But basically, New Pompeii is like a sci-fi thriller type book. There is a company that is able to transport people from the past into the present. So I thought of this before I read it in a review, but then somebody else said it in a review, so I'm going to say it anyway. But basically, it's like if you Jurassic Parked the Roman Empire. You know how in like Jurassic Park, science brings dinosaurs back? Well, in this one, science brings the Roman Empire back. Not the whole empire, just Pompeii, which is why it's New Pompeii, but they take all the people in Pompeii who were gonna die from the eruption, and they take them into the future, and they set up this little town, and they convince them that they're still in Pompeii, and then they have some like historians come in, like our main character. And so that was the best part of this. But what got really weird was that every few chapters we would flip back to this girl who at first we were told was dead, and then it was like, no, she's not dead, even though she could walk through things in the last couple chapters. Her story was just a little confusing and changed the vibes completely every couple of chapters, which I didn't appreciate because I was enjoying sitting in New Pompeii and seeing what was up. Also, the ending of this was pretty confusing. Like, I'm not convinced I get it. And again, I waffled between, is this the type of confused that I'm like good with or the type that I'm not good with? And I think it's like half and half. So overall, this was a good time and a great idea, but I just think some of the execution fell a little short. And then I picked up Love and Other Carnivorous Plants, which is a YA contemporary romance, maybe. I'm always like, is it a contemporary? Is it a romance? Is it a contemporary romance? This one I think is solidly a contemporary romance. I think it's heavier on the contemporary than the romance, but the romance does play like a kind of large part anyway. I'm going on and on about this for no reason. So I also gave this 3.5 stars. Again, I was waffling with this. I was just having a hard time reading books at the end of this week. So rating this was hard because I teared up at one point, and I almost never cry at books. And there were parts of this that really hurt. So I was like, well, it got emotion out of me. Should I give it a 4? But then I just thought it was super repetitive at points. So I'm giving it a 3.5. In this one, we're following this girl. I've already forgotten her name. Dani. Right, short for Dandelion. Right, we're following Dandelion. And she has just had her first year at school, which was actually a first half a year at school, because then in the second semester, she got caught with trigger warning an eating disorder, and she ended up in treatment for the second semester. And she did not tell her best friend back home about this. They were still kind of fighting about the fact that they went to different colleges, but she didn't tell her best friend that she was in treatment or like what was up with her. She just like ghosted for a couple months, and she was like, I'm busy with finals. And then she came back, started this book, right? Because it's summertime. And she basically is told like, you have to get your act together so that you can return to Harvard in the fall, which is what you want, right? And then she's like in that weird liminal space of recovery, because recovery is not like a linear process, right? So she's not all better now that she's home from treatment. We're following her, and then she runs into a girl that she met at treatment that she never thought she'd see again, who she kind of had a thing for, but she's like, I'm not gay, but like, is she? You know, so it's like a queer coming of age story where she's dealing with all of those things. I would kind of say this is more new adult than young adult because she is already in college. It's not like her senior year of high school or anything. But I don't say that to be like teenagers shouldn't read this book, because it does have very dark topics, and obviously those need to be handled with care. Like, it's not just the eating disorder, it's also like substance abuse and it's so many other things, right? Oh, and like grief. Something suddenly happened in the middle of this that made it a book about grief anyway. But I do think it is important for teenagers to read those things because like terrible things happen in teenagers' worlds, regardless of whether or not we want those bad things to happen in their worlds. I feel like a lot of times people are hesitant to recommend books that, even though they're technically written for that audience, contain really deep, dark things. They think that books like this are exposing kids to these realities of life, but they're not. Usually these are things that kids already know about. Like, I'm specifically talking teenagers in this case. As a teenager, I already knew about these things. It wouldn't have been shocking to read this book. Teens aren't learning those things from these books. These books are giving them a helping hand to realize like, I'm not alone in this world. These things happen to people everywhere. And I did also really appreciate the author's note at the end where she was like, hey, I just wanted to clarify. Danny is one imaginary person dealing with all these things, and like, she doesn't handle them the best. I'm not endorsing the way that she handles them, and it doesn't mean that like her story is the right way for things to happen, like in terms of her feelings about like labels or all these things. Like, just because she finds something helpful doesn't mean that's the right thing, you know? So I thought that was good, although I'd maybe introduce that at the beginning. Overall, I thought this book was really valuable. It just did really get repetitive sometimes, which I think had a definite point. Like, I think it really drove home the point of what it was like to be in Danny's head. But at the same time, I feel like 30 to 40 pages of this book didn't need to exist. You know what I mean? 3.5 it is. Yay, 2 books down. Happy Sunday. After a busy social day yesterday, today I have mainly stayed in my room and I have been reading, which particularly has been interesting with this one book at a time thing. But I did end up finishing the book I started yesterday and also reading an entire other book. So first I'm going to talk to you about Beautiful Animals by Lawrence Osborne, which I gave 2.5 stars. In this book, we're following these 2 girls, young adult age, and they're spending the summer on this Greek island, Hydra, and one day they're walking around the island and they stumble upon this man, originally from Syria, but he seems to have fled and has now crossed over to this island from Turkey, and they hatch a plan to try and help him escape before the police can catch him. And things with that plan go very wrong. Excellent premise, but the execution, I just felt like was not there. I didn't connect with any of the characters. I had the hardest time paying attention to this. I don't know if it was the way it was written or because I was tired when I read it or what, but I just like had so much trouble paying attention. And I still felt like there were things that were not like addressed by the end of the book. For instance, I truly feel like we never got a good picture of why this man was fleeing, so that was really unsatisfying about it. But yeah, I did read this. And then immediately after finishing this, I picked up Love Scene Take 2 by Alex Evansley. Can't tell if it's supposed to be YA or new adult or something like that. It's something in that realm. One of the main characters is 18, the other's 20. What's really upsetting about this book is that I gave it 3.5, which is not a bad rating. What's upsetting is that I thought it would be more than that. So when I started it, for the like first 50 pages, I was kicking my feet and I was like, is this gonna be a 5-star book? Like, I felt that so strongly, and then it just dove afterwards. So the setup for this book, we're following this actor. He's a pretty young actor. He's 20. His name's Teddy Sharp, and he is auditioning for a role in a book to movie adaptation that is going to be like the next big thing. On his way back from the audition, which he feels like he totally fails, he ends up on the same flight as the author of that book. She's 18. Weirdly, her description fits the description of the author of this book, whatever. After some airplane troubles, he ends up at her family's house for a couple of days, and things kind of go from there. Listen, I thought the setup for this was really fun. I hadn't necessarily seen that trope before of like, she wrote the book, he's auditioning to be in the movie situation, and then there were several scenes at a lake house, and I love a lake house moment. So I was eating that up. Something happened and we skipped forward 3 months, and it was really not the best after that. I feel like the reason that I love slow burn is because there's less communication in slow burn. Miscommunication. There's less miscommunication in slow burn. Imagine seeing the exact opposite of the whole point. Really, the only thing you can do with a plot when people get together or like clearly show their interest in one another early on in the book is bring up conflicts in their relationship so that they miscommunicate the rest of the time, so that you don't know if they'll get a happily ever after. And that was definitely the case with this book. I felt like we would read one scene and they were like, we're happy, and the next scene they'd be like, it's over. And then that just happened over and over again. It is not marketed this way, but this did start out as a story on Wattpad. I'm pretty sure based off of what the author said in the acknowledgements. And at first it was starting out as the like great Wattpad book, and then it switched to the other kind of Wattpad book. If I had had this setup, I would have written a totally different book. Okay, I said what I said, but there was also a secondary character that I loved to death in this. The girl who ends up playing the female protagonist in the movie. She's great. Wish this book had been about her, to be honest. She was fabulous. Not that I didn't like Bennett and Teddy, but I do think that I liked Olivia more than I liked Bennett, who was the female love interest in this. I had like a pretty fun time reading this. I definitely think the flaws stood out even more since I just read the whole thing straight through. I absolutely hated the miscommunication in this. I'm not sure I loved how it was plotted, but like I really liked some of the characters. I really liked some of the connections between them. I really liked the setup of the book, and I really loved Olivia. That's on that. And I still am probably going to read some more today, but I probably won't finish another book. I'll come back later, probably tomorrow, let's be honest with ourselves, and I'll tell you about how this week of reading one book at a time has really gone for me. So I guess my question here is, would I ever do this again? And the answer is not unless someone forced me to. I'm not saying it was a bad week of reading, because it wasn't. But I do think it was not the best week of reading, like mentally. Like I found myself so many times being like, I don't want to read, or I want to read, but I just wish it wasn't this book right now. And it's not because I wanted to DNF that book. Like it wasn't bad enough that I wanted to stop reading it entirely. It was just that I didn't feel like reading that particular story in that particular moment. And so I think reading a bunch of things all at one time works very much for the way that my brain enjoys reading. And if I want to get maximum enjoyment out of reading, I have to be switching between books. That said, I'm really glad I tried this. It showed me that I can do it, because at some points before, when I had this idea, I was like, am I actually physically capable of doing that? I doubt it, but hey, I did it. And I also got myself wondering, I mean, this is the way I used to read when I was younger. Is there something wrong with the way I read now? Would it be better if I just read one book at a time? And the answer is no. I'm perfectly happy with how I read now. So if you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. Do you read one book at a time or many at once? What did you think of this video? And subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye.